get started.
Okay, yeah. Cool.
So why don't we just do like
Team building.
I was gonna say, Jonathan, why don't we do like just a quick intro for the video, and then we can do like maybe a quick icebreaker or whatever. Or, like, you all can introduce yourselves, but Jonathan doesn't have to report that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone already knows each other.
Oh, is that your text message?
Those minions.
Wow. I like minions.
I made minions out of tires for my garden. There's the yellow with the eye.
All right.
Want me to?
Well, I can introduce.
Yeah.
So, all right, are you ready? All right. Hello, climate leaders. Today is July 13th, and we have our equity training session today. So I wanted to hand over today's presentation to our guest speaker from Greenlining Institute, Emmy Wang.
Cool, thanks. Hi y'all. My name's Emmy Wang. I come from an org called the Greenlining Institute. So we're a racial justice policy and advocacy org. Greenlining as opposed to redlining. And we're based in Oakland. The reason why we're here today is because we've been connected with the Transformative Climate Communities work, the TCC work, for a bit now. My organization helped to pass the policy, the bill that created the TCC program. So our vision at the time was, to be able to really honor what residents' visions were around the improvements that they want to see in their neighborhoods, have that be a community-controlled process, and then be able to provide the funding to be able to make that happen. So we passed the bill that created the TCC program, and then we kind of came here to Stockton to kind of just do education and awareness work around some of the state investments available around climate opportunities. And we met with Jonathan, we met with Little Manila, Fathers and Families, public health advocates, and folks are really interested in the TCC opportunity. So at that time, this is probably 5 years ago, we helped to convene the initial group of partners who applied for the TCC grant. And then now you all are here as like TCC climate justice leaders, which is pretty cool to see kind of in real life. So it feels like a little bit of a full circle moment. I'm here to present on this framework called Making Equity Real. But before we get into that, it'd be great for us to just understand for me to understand who's in the room, because you all know each other. But maybe if you don't mind, tell me, let's see, your name. So just to root us in one specific historic inequitable policy. Do folks know what this kind of diagram is? What is this diagram of? What is this image of? You think? Just in general.
Stockton.
I actually don't know what place it is, but can you...
Are you sure you don't know what place it is?
Oh, well, that's above Weber.
There you go.
That's downtown, yeah.
So what kind of map is this? Have you all seen a map like this before?
This is a district map.
It's a map of a place.
Maybe like different purposes.
Yeah, so this is actually, we'll go into this more detail, but this is actually a redlining map of Stockton, right? I think you all talked about redlining in your class so far? Okay, so then we'll get into it. Okay, cool. So, just to provide a little bit of historical context, so in the 1930s, in the middle of the Great Depression, a lot of families were obviously struggling to make ends meet, to survive, to be able to feed their families, and they were also defaulting on their home mortgages. So in response to this, federal agencies began issuing government-backed loans, but they really only issued them to one subset of people. They issued them to white folks. They did not really issue them to folks of color. So this is the redlining map of Stockton from, I think, 1937. And so to figure out how to distribute mortgages, the federal government worked with bankers and realtors to determine which neighborhoods to invest in based on credit risk. And to identify credit risk, the primary indicator of whether a neighborhood was a credit risk or not was race. It wasn't about any economic factors. It was about whether particularly black folks, but also other folks of color lived in those neighborhoods. So in this map here, red means worst. Let's see. Red meant hazardous. Yellow meant definitely declining. Blue meant still desirable. And then green meant best. These are the official housing gradations from the federal government. They have a manual, they have a whole government apparatus in your office.
That's crazy.
It's crazy, right?
That's crazy.
It's insane. It's insane. This was government federal policy.
Was this FDR?
This was during FDR, but then continued under
Yeah.
subsequent,
And you know, when all this was happening, I was growing up, and you don't even think about it, because you didn't even know aware of it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So this, and then I don't know if you can see this, so the text up top, this is taken from a 1938 description of South Stockton. It comes from a manual that's describing kind of the southeast part of Stockton. So you can see here, right, it says outside city limits, no deed restrictions or zoning. This area largely given over to lower racial elements. Improvements consist of 1 and 2 room cabins of cheap construction, many of them near shacks. This is definitely a blighted district and will probably never grade higher than the low red assigned to it. So because of who lived there, the race of the folks who lived there, they deemed this area red, definitely hazardous. And they're also deeming it like there's an essentialism here, right? This is a definitely blighted district. They will probably never grade higher, as if to say that your place is always going to be that way. So between 1932, so starting in FDR, but then between 1932 to 1962, so a period of 3 decades, the federal government backed $120 billion of housing loans, over which 98% went to white people, and that's it. Federal housing loans for white Americans to buy their homes, build generational wealth, build stability for a period of 3 decades. So, yeah, this is just an illustration to say, I think we know this. Race has always determined the winners and losers in America. Our entire society, economy, culture has been structured based on race lines. And it's important to remember that this isn't just, it's not just an accident, right? These were deliberate public policy decisions carried out first by the federal government, but reinforced by county, city, reinforced by government decision-making at every level. And then we all know, obviously, racial injustice is still here with us today, right? The legacy of this is still really, really strong. All these maps is a great, at the end of this slide, there's a great website that links a bunch of redlining maps for across the country. So you can take a look. You can take a look at the descriptions that are there. It's linked at the end of the slide. Okay. So moving into today, just wanted to talk a little bit about the linkages between this past of racist policies and today. So this is also still redlining maps. This is Oakland, not Stockton, but this is Oakland where I'm based and where I live. The left is the 1937 redlining map. The middle is the 2018 Cal-Virus screen map, which I think you may have talked about in your past sessions. This is a tool that measures the cumulative impacts of poverty and pollution. It's basically a tool to identify which are the communities that are breathing the most polluted air, which are the communities that are environmental justice communities. And then the right is in 2021, kind of the height of COVID in some ways, a map of COVID cases in Oakland. And what you'll see immediately, right, the same communities that were redlined, divested of government resources in the 1930s all the way up to the 1960s. Those are still the same communities that are most polluted today. They're the communities that suffer the worst public health outcomes, the communities that when COVID hit, for all of these reasons, had the highest number of COVID cases and COVID mortalities. So this legacy of kind of structural planning really sits with us today.
That's Oakland?
This is Oakland.
Where are those maps at? They're just really far. They're just really far.
You mean like small on the screen, or?
Yeah, for me.
Oh, well, I'll share the slides with you, and then you can take it.
Because that stuff interests me.
Yeah.
Don't worry, Pat, I'll send out all the slides and the handouts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll study it too.
Yeah. Okay. So, oops. Here we go. Okay. So, this is a segue into what do we do about this? Like, what does this mean with this information, with this knowledge? How do we grapple with this? So, for us at Greenlining, again, I work at a racial justice organization. For us, racial equity fundamentally means transforming the behaviors, institutions, and systems that disproportionately harm Black folks and people of color. It means centering community ownership over the solutions. And equity means increasing access to power, redistributing and providing additional resources, and eliminating barriers to opportunity. This is kind of our, in some ways, our mission statement around racial equity and racial justice. So with that in mind, this is where we get a little more, we're kind of bringing you down to the meat of this presentation. But I want to share this framework. It's called the Making Equity Real framework that my organization created. Basically, we developed this framework because right now what we're seeing in California is equity is very much a buzzword today. Like, after the uprising, after George Floyd, all the corporations were putting out equity statements. Decision makers in California are talking about, for sure, we believe in the importance of impacted communities. We need to pay people, we need to invest money, we need to put people in leadership. Like, in some ways, the solutions are very simple. And yet, we need to persuade other people of the validity of our arguments. So, basically what you're looking at here is, I would say that this left side here, if there's one thing that I'm hoping that you take away from this presentation, it's these 4 steps. For equity to be embedded in any project, it has to be embedded in the goals, in the process, in the implementation, and in the evaluation. That's really fundamental. So, just to give a little more details, and unpacking these 4 categories. For goals, if you're starting a project from scratch, let's say, we want you to reflect and think about, what is your equity definition for your goal of project? Is equity actually a core strategy of whatever you're working on, or is it just like an add-on? Is it just like you're tacking it on to the very end? And so really making sure you're embedding equity into the overall goals. Then it has to be embedded into the process, and I think this is where a lot of public processes in particular fall apart. Who's making decisions? Who's at the table? How is power shared? How are impacted communities and communities who are vulnerable? How are they involved in decision making over whatever project it might be, right? And this is the work of the Community Coalition and the climate justice leaders. It's to center the folks who live in South Stockton, who are most impacted by environmental injustice, to be the leaders of your own solutions. Implementation in some ways is maybe the easiest to understand. It's just, what are you intending to do with your projects, and how will your projects reduce disparities, right? What are the intended, measurable, and direct benefits that your work is seeking to address? Is it to increase or decrease poor air quality? Is it to distribute fresh produce to your neighbors? How is that? What are the benefits of your project? And then lastly, the last one is just around analysis and evaluation. How are you tracking for equity, right? If you have an equity goal, but then you don't track it, then you're not being accountable to that goal. So how are you tracking progress on your collective efforts? So from here, I'm going to go into each of the...
You're keeping the same people in the same section. Before I really truly knew anything about what you just showed me. Even though I've heard it, I never really put them together. But when I sat there and saw the board, I went, the redistricting is a reflection of you guys. And it wasn't a fair redistricting. It wasn't fair. It wasn't diverse. And I said this on record, and I'm serious. This was it was an eye opener because I was in front of these people that I deal with all the time, and I'm just like, one white man, one white woman, and a Mexican man. Wow, that's a representation of our county, right?
I mean, that's that. One, political power in this country has always been held by the moneyed class, by white folks, by folks who are trying to hoard power for themselves. So in fact, their goal is to retain power.
They're scared.
And our goal is to flip the switch and to say, we can't have that be what we're moving towards.
Right.
Right. Cool. All right, so just to go in a little bit of detail, these are essentially a series of questions that we'd ask you to consider. Anytime you're starting a project, you're evaluating a project, you're asking the decision maker to do something, these are questions to get at whether you are in fact embedding equity into your goals, right? So the first question here is what is the equity goal? Who are the vulnerable populations that your work seeks to address? Are you clear about who they are? Do you have a clear definition? Is everyone on board with that equity goal? I think we see a lot of a lot of processes fall apart because folks never define the equity problem that they're working on. And then one person thinks they're working on this, one person thinks they're working on this. And then you can't do that if you have two separate goals, right? So I think also a key question here is around like this values question on the bottom. What values ground your work together, right? Why are you doing this work, and what are the principles by which you will carry out this working relationship, and getting alignment on those pieces. So, as an example, let's see. Cool, so this is an example, this is like policy, but an example that we like to point to is LA County did a county-wide vulnerable mapping assessment of the whole county to understand where within the county specifically the climate vulnerabilities were. And so what I'm going to point out in this goal, it's very small, so maybe I'll read it to you. Just to say that in multiple goals, equity is embedded with multiple goals. So there's a goal here. Goal number 1 is around the county will protect low-income communities and communities of color from pollution, reduce health and economic inequities, and support more resilient and inclusive communities. Goal number 3 is equitable and sustainable land use and development without displacement, right? Trying to protect against the impacts of gentrification. And then goal number 11 is inclusive, transparent, and accountable governance that facilitates participation in sustainability efforts. So just to say the multiple ways that you can thread equity into a goal. Okay, moving on. So this is all about process, and this is, who sits at the table, who has power. So there are questions. How are decisions made? How is power shared between residents, community-based organizations, local government, institutional stakeholders? How are you doing community engagement, organizing, outreach in a way that's accessible to everyone, that has language justice at the core, that has accessibility at the core, all of these pieces? Will the project, are you thinking about both anti-displacement, but also other harms at the outset, right? How are you thinking about their unintended consequences of your project? And how will you as projects support existing community priorities? So all these pieces around how do people work together, and what is your process? What is the process that you're developing around that? As an example here, let's see. So this is a tool that we like. This is a tool from another organization called Movement Strategy Center. It's called the Spectrum. Oh, this is very, very tiny. Okay, so it's called the Spectrum of Community Engagement to Ownership. It is basically a tool to identify where are you doing, let's see, are you doing mere kind of community input on the left-hand side, or are you really collaborating and deferring to community ownership on the right-hand side? So oftentimes we see, especially in like public processes, government processes, folks are marginalizing our communities, folks are tokenizing our communities, they're just asking for input into stuff that's already been baked, right? The plan is already there, they're asking for window dressing, they're asking you to show up to the meeting, but they're not really looking for meaningful input, right? And we want to be moving towards kind of collaborating and deferring to, where it starts directly with the community-owned process, where community gets to define what you're working on, what your challenges are, what the vision is moving forward. And yeah, it's just a spectrum to help us understand where projects are. I think it's also helpful to be honest about where folks are on the spectrum. I think sometimes government likes to overpromise and say, oh no, we're collaborating. But if they would just be real and say, no, we just need your input on these 3 questions and that's it. In some ways, I think that would help with expectation setting around the process that you're all getting involved in.
Yeah, but how much of it do we have to involve like that? I mean, this goes on for years.
Yeah.
And then this section opens up, and then this listening section's open, and then they're doing, and it's like, enough is enough. Stop talking. Do something.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm older than these guys. I've been watching more talking than doing. They're at a generation, maybe they'll get to see doing.
Oh.
Maybe they'll get tired of talking.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of talking, and then there's not a lot of follow-up. There's not a lot of money to make it happen.
Or a lot of looking at liability.
Yeah, and I think for the community's end, it leads to a bunch of just stakeholder fatigue. You're just tired of being asked all the time, right? I'm in a meeting late at night, kind of like this one, sorry y'all. But yeah, being asked for your input all the time, but it doesn't, but not materializing concretely.
Right, right. Okay, there's enough talk about housing, let's build.
Mm-hmm. No. 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 Happens everywhere.
I'm tired of I want to be president.
Cool. Okay, and then just moving on. Okay, so then this is implementation. And again, I think this might be the most straightforward piece of it. But just, yeah, whatever you're working on, how is it addressing community identified needs? And how did you identify those community needs? What are the intended direct and measurable outcomes of the project? Are the benefits of the project targeted in progressive ways, right? Understanding our history and present of inequality, it's not equality to then give everyone an equal amount of things, right? Actually, to close the gap, we need to be investing much more in our communities that have been left behind. So how are the benefits targeted in that way? Here, I want to highlight, so this is a project in Pacoima in northeast San Fernando Valley. They actually got the same TCC grant that you all got, and so they got it, I think, a year earlier than you all. Yeah, a year earlier than you all got it. And the reason I want to highlight them here is this effort is being led by a community-based organization, an EJ organization called Pacoima Beautiful. They've been organizing for about a quarter century, about 25 years, for healthier environmental conditions in their community. And kind of because of their long history, their long trust with residents, they are able to manage their TCC grant without local government in the driver's seat like it is with Stockton. So the primary applicant is not the city of Pacoima. It's actually another entity that is just serving as like the fiscal administrator. And the Pacoima Beautiful is really kind of leading the show. So their project, just because they've been at this work for so long, it's like really addressing, like they know what their community needs. A lot of what their residents have identified is park space and recreational space and then active transportation. So their TCC projects are all focused around that. I think they have a lot of trust with their community, so it seems to be going fairly well. And yeah, I just think this is the closest example of like a truly community controlled TCC project, because local government is involved, they have to be there of course, but they're not in the driver's seat like they are with Stockton, but also all the other TCC grants. Currently there are 8 TCC communities, 7 of them are led by local government, right? Because it's just so hard for a community to be able to manage capital investments like that. So they're just like a shining, super dope example. Yeah.
Because they had the want, they had the will, they had the want, they had the drive to do it.
And they've just been doing it for so long. They have the track record under the belt, you know? Like, I'm hopeful that the work that you all are doing here, it's going to have benefits and impacts in the here and now. But you're also paving the runway for the next 5-10 years, right? So that the next group of organizers who come along have it much easier, right? You already laid the groundwork.
I think you guys should apply for some grants to take us all down to see it.
Instead of go see Pacoima. Yeah, they're doing some cool, they're like revitalizing, they have like a public plaza that they're revitalizing, they're doing some green alley work. I haven't seen it in person too, so I would want to see it too. And then the last one, oh yeah, this is just around evaluation. So again, you know, I think a lot of evaluation these days, it's like pretty cut and dry, right? How many greenhouse gases did you reduce? How many trees did you plant? How many miles of bicycle route did you create? For equity evaluation, it has to be tied back to your equity goal. So your equity goal was around improving air quality in these zip codes in South Stockton. Then you have to be measuring, are you improving air quality in these zip codes in South Stockton? So it's just asking for much more tailored evaluation than I think often happens. Yeah, that's basically it here. And that's basically it, right? This is the framework around, again, as you all are thinking about your working community, as you're all thinking about the lessons that you've taken from this whole curriculum, as you're all thinking about advancing the TCC work, what are the ways that you can measure like progress on TCC using this framework and thinking about, is equity embedded in the goals, process, implementation, and analysis? As you do kind of local organizing, what are the ways that you can keep this in mind? So that's the presentation. Hoping it's helpful for y'all. And then, again, you'll get these slides. So these are some of the resources. We have a much longer and very complicated guidebook on this framework. And then some of the key sources here. So this link here, the redlining map has a bunch of really cool redlining maps from across the country. So that's the piece there. I have some discussion questions for y'all, but let me just pause and see, if there are any questions or feedback thus far.
Me talking first is fun. So I did some note taking, and then one of the first things that you were talking about, how would you start this, right? And I know diversity is cool as far as culture or ethnic, but I think one of the bigger piece players that is in there is lived experience. So when you're talking about how do you build up an infrastructure of the poor side of town, who's most affected by it? Low income, homeless, people can't breathe, and not people that sit there and say, oh no, I breathe fine, but I want to be on board.
Yeah, totally.
See, and that's what, to me, is worth a lot of stuff, is because not only are you getting the real nitty-gritty feedback, but you're getting the ins and the outs, you know. So I think that's one of the first things that looked at is like the first requirement would be lived experience. You know.
Yeah.
Second would be ethnic or culture, or what is it, race? Whatever it's called. I don't know what it's called. My friends keep telling me they're indigenous Indians. They keep telling me they use race, and I'm like, where? You know. I don't know. It gets confusing at times. But I just think lived experience plays the best part when you're trying to fix something, and people should not look. And lived experience comes along with the stigma, consumer. Just because you're a consumer of asthma, you're a consumer of low income, you are a part of that stigma, and so people say, oh, you know, you're not someone that has everything together, so you can't be a strong voice. That's not true. You know, people that might have their together, those people over there are going to look at you and say, well, why are you making us spend money? Where you have a whole crew come in with a lived experience and they say, this is why you have to spend money. These folks are dying.
Yeah, totally. I mean, anything that is happening in your own neighborhood should talk to the people who live in that neighborhood, right?
Right.
The folks who are impacted, the folks who have that lived experience.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quick question. Is there any data that shows like how many of the residents in South Stockton are like first generation or second generation? I think it also matters how long someone has lived in an area to want to see a change in that community. So I think that'd be interesting data to see, because I feel like a lot of the people that I know in South Stockton, most of them are like first generation, like their families have come from somewhere else and like settled here in Stockton, and their goal for their children is to, you know, get an education and leave Stockton.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that's also something to consider.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if there's a data set out there on that. I'd be super curious on what the demographics of Stockton are and like how long folks have been here. Does like correspond to different neighborhoods. But yeah, I think that definitely makes an impact and I think Stockton is so unique. This place is so unique. And y'all get a bad rap, right? This rap.
Our pop quiz question of the day is Stockton the most diverse city in the country? The answer is true according to our news articles in 2020. I don't think they've released anything new since then, so we'll just say it's true. So make sure if you're watching the recording to mark true on your forms.
Grow up in Stockton and then the goal is to leave, you know, that's pretty heartbreaking. So shifting that narrative and shifting the conditions here so that people want to stay and people want to invest in their own community. I think like with, you know, it sounds like a lot of you have gone off to school and come back, like coming back and investing in the place that you call home. Yeah. I'm curious, through the climate justice workshop, I don't know, is it workshop series? I don't know what the program is called, Climate Justice Leaders. Yeah, what are you all, do you all have a group goal around kind of the work that you're trying to achieve? Do you all have individual goals? What does that look like for you all?
I think we all share like the same like values and
Yeah.
passion. We want to
Yeah.
make a concrete impact on South Stockton in general.
Yeah.
And we want that change to be long lasting.
Yeah.
And we also want to just like further implement community trusting and organizations that help them. Because I know that due to things like lack of information here, it's kind of a little bit hard to trust people who help you, because you don't know like, oh, I used to live in this city, and I know you guys go through this, so we're here to help you. And that is nice, but not everybody's going to accept that right away. So it's like, some people are like, well, why are you here? Why aren't you in your place? So I want to, as a pioneer, I want to like not show that like not everyone is an outsider. That we can help each other. Us, not just other people. And that people involved. Sorry, I'm like going forever. Yeah, that it is possible for us.
Yeah, I love that, right? It's about relying on each other, trusting each other, building a more durable, lasting future for South Stockton in ways that are like governed by us. Yeah.
I also want to add to what she said. So, I think we each have what we want to do with, William gave us, like pillars that we can work on, like transportation, air quality. I personally want to go out in my community and talk more about the air quality that we have in Southside Stockton and how it affects us, like mentally, physically, and what it can cause. So, but we each have, we can partner up with like other group members and tackle that together.
Yeah, so have a specific focus, but then leaning on each other for support.
Yes.
Solidarity. Yeah. Okay, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, I'm raising my hand. When you want to talk with folks, like say if I'm a resident and speak with other residents, how do I introduce to them about equity, or is there a sort of a way to talk about equity? Because it's a big word. I mean, a lot of people always talk about, like when in workshops, they ask me, what is really, like, what's equity? Like, give me a scenario.
To me, it's just, and maybe this is another big word, so maybe it's all that, it's different outcomes, right? We all have different outcomes in life based on where we live, the neighborhood that we live in, our skin color, our income, and it's really clear that a lot of folks, poor folks, folks of color, indigenous communities, we have poor life outcomes, whether that's life expectancy, whether that's the amount of money that you can make in your lifetime, whether that's your housing. So equity, moving towards a vision of equity, is one where we all have what we need to survive and to thrive, and where there isn't this huge chasm between outcomes for people. I think that's how I try to describe it. Yeah.
I wanted to give an example that I've used in my leadership experience. I just want to use that as an example. When I was president at Delta College, I led the initiatives for the first food pantry. My board successfully organized the beginning of that project, and the administration, the equity manager of the school took it over, and they were able to successfully create a 501c3. But how I began, right, is I was 19 years old at Delta, and I was taking history classes about New Jim Crow, right, and all the history and how it impacts us. And for me at the time, and even to this day, right, it's a struggle out here. I was a starving college student. FAFSA does not last forever. And I was over there going from South Stockton to Delta, hungry. And then I was in my office and a bunch of students were coming up to me like, okay, we have a food pantry and all we had in the food pantry was like Jell-O and corn. Like, that's not gonna feed people. And so when we talk about equity, like, we just gotta be raw and truthful about what it is that we're doing because it's their job to take care of it. Period.
Just to put the, I don't know, I think, we use all these big words, poverty and equity and all these big words, but it's really like, people are hungry, people are struggling. And structurally, particularly here in the US, it's because of government policy. It's not just chance, right? The deck is stacked. Yeah.
So I call it layman language, you know. Equity to me is what do I get out of something I invested in?
Oh, okay.
So buying a house.
Different kind of equity. Two
No,
different definitions.
but I put into the house, I put in a paint job, I put in structure, I do something. I'm getting something out of it. So the equity in my neighborhood, if I'm telling you about tractors in our neighborhood and the Greenway, and you're not playing a part of helping us work towards a goal of getting tractors out of our neighborhood and, you know, building trees around the freeway to catch a lot of that black dust. What are you getting out of it? You know, dirty air, right? Asthma, COPD. That's your equity. That's your equity. You just got that out of dirty air, right? So do you want healthy equity or do you want bad equity? So it's whatever, if I invest, I want something back. That's my equity. You know, so if I'm going to go to neighborhood watches and give a speech about the dirty air, I'm hoping my equity would be each and every one of you at that meeting grab something out of that. Now you go home, you're not burning plastic, you're separating your garbage, you know, you're doing something that's improving our environment. That's equity for me. You know?
Yeah. I like that framing. I haven't thought of it that way, but yeah, I like that framing. Yeah. Cool. Maybe just to round out this discussion, I mean, thinking about your goals for this work, whether it's increasing air quality or increasing.
Not improving.
Improving. That's the word. Improving air quality. Or bringing neighbors together and building that trust. Yeah, looking at Stockton today, looking at your work through the climate justice program, where do you feel excited? Where do you feel like there are opportunities to move forward to that goal? What are the opportunities to push here? And where are the opportunities to move forward?
So here's my opportunity. Like I told you guys before, there was a presentation at City Hall which really impressed me by young people.
Okay.
And that's my equity, is investing in young people, and promoting them to get involved.
Yeah.
And so my equity from here is to help support young people to let's get into the neighborhood, let's get into a meeting, let's build that project. Do you know what project that was? Does anybody remember what project that was? That some youth, I don't know if they were high school or freshmen, but they did this presentation at City Hall and it was absolutely fantastic. And I think that's what I would love to see is that my generation's tired. I mean, Robert Redford and the whole 9 yards are all looking tired, but I think this generation has a chance of bringing our earth back. And I think that's the equity that this meeting is doing, is investing in how to help people. I mean, when we had to do those quick moments of a speech, right? They did really good. They really did really good. And it was very impressive. And so if they can expand that, this is what's going to reach all the neighborhoods, even at City Hall, because it is on short circuit. People have the option of seeing it later on. I sent him a commercial with Matthew McConaughey in it. He was in what do you call it, Super Bowl. And you got to see this commercial. I saw it the other day on YouTube, and I went, that's so impressive. It was about Earth.
Wait, is Matthew McConaughey young?
Matthew McConaughey, the one that does the Cadillac.
Yeah, but is he a young person or no?
And you're younger than me.
Okay, okay.
But, they have, he's impressing young people. There's a chance to come back.
Well, I just think it's so clear. The earth is collapsing. There are wildfires everywhere. Our democracy is failing us. Like the failings of many failed generations, I think it's clear, right? And we have to take some kind of action. Or we have to try, at the very least, we have to push.
And I don't look at it as failed generations. I look at it as ignorant generations because, when my mom and dad were born, they didn't realize that all this stuff we were doing was going to kill the earth one day.
Well, it's not about ordinary people, it's about the corporations who are pushing their agenda for decades, right? And hiding the science so that what they knew was nothing.
And the corporate backing behind them.
Yeah, totally. I feel like I've heard a lot about, there's just so many air quality kind of initiatives here. There's stuff that Little Bill Hill is doing. Oh, you do something you connected with that. There's stuff that, just folks are trying to tackle this indoor air quality and outdoor air quality. Are you all involved in those efforts? Where do you see hope or movement in those efforts?
Can I ask you something? When we did the water quality and stuff like that, is that because they asked us to, or are we involved with that through you?
Through me.
No, so you have this intertwined.
Got it.
Can you repeat your question?
Yeah.
I guess I'm just asking, I keep on hearing about air quality improvement efforts here in South Stockton. It might be air quality monitoring, it might be improving indoor air quality, it might be building resilience centers so that when there's a really bad air quality day, folks have somewhere to go. And so, I'm just curious how much that is hitting you all. How much are you in contact with some of those efforts?
Well, we've been giving presentations, a lot of hands-on to with what we can do, but right now it's, like I said, it's more like observing all of that information and then going out into the community and sharing what we have learned.
Okay, so more to come.
Yes.
Personally, I'm a little bit more involved with the science part of it and data collecting. Like I mentioned, do water quality testing. And ironically, that links back to air quality because we monitor the HAB situation that's going on in the Delta, the harmful algae blooms.
Okay.
So the cyanobacteria in the water. And it was recently confirmed that the HABs in the water becomes airborne and causes air pollution, which is causing a lot of lung damage and a bunch of other stuff to the residents. So currently, the way I see it, it's because a lot of government agencies aren't really doing anything about it, knowing that it's a problem. We are working on collecting the data to have our own data that we can present and be this is proof that we have an issue. It needs to be addressed. So I think currently we're in the process of collecting that data to get changes.
Well, it's so it's once in a while that you have to prove the pollution that you're experiencing, right? And I've lived in a polluted neighborhood. But I think it's so important to have that localized, local data that's really showing what level of pollution and emissions are happening.
Another kind of issue that I'm kind of seeing now that I'm doing more work in it is the residents are expected to fix the problem that other agencies have done, and it's a low income neighborhood, and they're expected to either volunteer their time or do minimum wage job. And obviously, if we want to help our community, we'll do it out of our own will. But even then, I don't think they understand or want to. They understand that's low income, and we need an income to survive and maintain ourselves. So I don't see that accountability
Yeah.
either.
Well, and it's labor. It's
Just
labor,
need to
yeah,
know.
it's expertise, it's time. Yeah.
Thankfully, like I've been able to find opportunities in the field, but many times we are approached and are told to go with the volunteers to do this work. And of course, there's grants and stuff, but those don't usually come in time.
Yeah.
That's an issue that I've been seeing. It's a real work that's being done.
Yeah, totally.
And like the thing is like you won't go to other neighborhoods like more like rich neighborhoods and expect them to do work for free within their neighborhoods. So,
Well, it's like who's deemed as having expertise, right? Like I think folks in multi neighborhoods are deemed as having, I don't know, technical expertise, scientific expertise. And
like it's a thing to have them do free work.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely a ton of challenges. There's a ton of barriers to implementing equity and to making equity real. From all the levels, from, the stuff around how are people involved, are they compensated or not, to, are you even trying to address the air pollution up there, at this place? But, yeah, I think the work that you all are doing here as climate justice leaders that to me is like the base of all the work that needs to happen. It needs to come from residents, it needs to come from impacted community members, and then we need to devise the solutions together that we want for our own communities. So, yeah, cool.
I wish I could get Stockton to repay for my water filter,
Oh,
so
okay.
it saves to drink the water.
Oh,
It was $8,000 investment
Oh, my
just to drink
goodness.
the water, not haul it in.
Yeah, there should be.
But I don't smell chlorine and sulfur coming out of my pipes anymore.
God. Yeah, sulfur.
On south side,
Yeah.
there's all kinds of stuff that comes out of your water down there.
Yeah, anything else? Otherwise we can end on that depressing note. The water quality in your house.
And not something positive.
Somebody's gonna write a grant for water filters and I'll get reimbursed.
I just wanted to add that, maybe like not as something direct, but like kind of like a side impact I want to make is to just lessen the amount of hopelessness here. Like how we all talk about like things that are happening, and it's like not everybody's educated on what's being done to help it. So with that, with us educating our communities, I hope that they're believing in us and feeling hope for the future, and even maybe motivation to get out there like us. I don't want to be depressed about the work all the time. It's very easy to, and it's just everything is really depressing. It doesn't have to be depressing right now.
It would be nice if we could go march City Hall for Mayor Lincoln. I'm the biggest fan, right? But it would be nice to march City Hall and just say 1-to-1. Whatever the north side has, we get. Whatever the north side has, we get. I've had to change out my springs, my what do you call those things? Shocks, because of the holes, the lights, they have squirrels, we have rats. I'll trade them, one rat for one squirrel. But seriously, I just wish they would just make a policy saying, whatever we do to the north side, they just got some asphalt in their brown belt. It used to be a green belt, but we're in a drought, so now it's a brown belt. In a brown belt. They just got beautiful, and they're gonna line it, put lines on it, and everything on March Lane. It's like, what do we have? Truck route. Dogs barking loose, biting at our feet with rider bites.
We don't even have healthy food. And they're over there already bought golf courses and pools.
Yeah.
There it is there.
We even have a grocery store.
Right. And then, but I wanted to say something to Cindy. She said something about generations of Stocktonians, right? I'll tell you the truth. this time around, I came here in 2009, and I think around 2016-ish, after 2 years of being retired, I walked out my front yard and said, where the hell do you live? And all I saw was infrastructure. And I said, people are forced to live like this. And I just said, wow. Because I was never home, except for 36 hours, right? For being a truck driver. So when I finally was home every day, having to go to the store, and I'm like, where are the stores? Where's the banks? Where's the credit union? Where is,
warehouses.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
you know?
That's usually liquor store.
Yeah, liquor stores, they're sitting out front, you know, wait a minute, come on, you guys. This is a good neighborhood, it could be, just stop doing that, you know? And what did they say? We didn't even have holes to plant dirt in the cement like the north side has. Well, we got wide roads though. We would get blocked, you know. But it would be nice to move the road out a little bit more, and put some holes in the cement, trucks, and put some trees in it. I could give up 2 feet in front of my house for a tree.
Well, that's your